I pretended to be the mother of a random child to save her from being kidnapped, and now I'm her adoptive mother. The little girl was crying at the airport gate, and the man dragging her by the wrist wasn't slowing down despite her obvious distress. I was standing in line for my flight to Chicago when I heard her screaming that she didn't want to go, that she wanted her mommy, that this man wasn't her daddy. The man, maybe 40 with expensive clothes and a leather briefcase, kept saying in a tight voice that she needed to calm down, that they were going to miss their flight. But his grip on her wrist looked painful, and the child was maybe 6 years old with tears streaming down her terrified face. Everyone around them was watching but doing nothing, and I felt my stomach turn with the familiar rage at bystander inaction. The girl's eyes met mine for just a second, desperate and pleading, and something in me snapped. I stepped out of line and walked directly toward them, my heart pounding, no plan except that this felt fundamentally wrong. The man noticed me approaching and his expression hardened. I said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Sophie, baby, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The little girl's eyes widened in confusion, but the man's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Panic flashed across his face before he recovered and said, "Excuse me, this is my daughter and you need to back away." I moved closer and held out my arms to the child. "Sweetie, come to mommy. It's okay now." The girl hesitated for only a moment before wrenching her wrist free and running into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder. I held her tight and felt her small body shaking. The man's face flushed red and he stepped forward aggressively. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but that child is coming with me. I have legal custody and you're interfering with a court-ordered custody arrangement." His words should have made me back down, should have made me question my impulsive decision, but the way the girl was clinging to me with desperate strength told me she was terrified of this man. I said, "If you have legal custody, then you can show the documentation to airport security. Right now, this child is clearly distressed, and I'm not letting you take her anywhere until we verify your claims." An airport security officer had noticed the commotion and was walking toward us. The man saw him coming and his expression shifted from angry to calculating. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and said, "This is ridiculous. My ex-wife put her up to this. She's been trying to prevent me from exercising my custody rights for months. Here's the court order giving me full custody." The security officer, a man in his 50s named Davis according to his badge, looked between us and then at the paperwork. I had no idea what I was doing, no idea how to maintain this lie, but the little girl was still clinging to me and whispering, "Please don't let him take me. Please." Davis examined the custody documents and then looked at me. "Ma'am, do you have identification proving you're this child's mother? The paperwork here says the father has full custody as of 3 weeks ago." I didn't have identification because I wasn't this child's mother. I'd lied impulsively to stop what looked like an abduction, and now I was trapped in that lie with no way forward. But I couldn't hand this terrified child over to a man who made her scream just because he had paperwork. I said, "I have my ID, but those custody documents are fraudulent. I never agreed to give up custody, and I never attended any custody hearing. That court order shouldn't exist." The man interrupted. "She's lying. She's been in contempt of court for weeks, refusing to honor the custody agreement. I have documentation from my lawyer, from the court, everything. She's making false allegations because she can't accept that the judge ruled in my favor." Davis looked uncomfortable with the situation escalating. He called for backup on his radio and then asked me again for identification. The girl, who I'd called Sophie but whose real name I didn't know, looked up at me with wide brown eyes and whispered, "Are you really my mommy?" The question broke my heart because I could hear the hope in her voice, the desperate need to believe I was there to save her. I whispered back, "I'm here to keep you safe. That's what matters right now." A female security officer arrived and Davis explained the situation. More passengers were gathering, filming on their phones, creating a scene that the airport clearly wanted resolved quickly. The man whose name I still didn't know was insisting I be arrested for kidnapping and for violating a custody order. I was insisting the custody order was fraudulent and that I'd never seen this man before today, which was true but not in the way that would help my case. The female officer, Lieutenant Grant, asked both of us to come to the security office to sort this out away from the crowd. The man demanded the child be given to him immediately so he could make his flight. Grant said they needed to verify documentation first, and that the child would remain with whoever she felt safest with until that happened. The girl was still wrapped around me, and when Grant asked if she wanted to stay with me or go with the man, she said in a tiny voice, "I want to stay with her. He's scary." The man's face contorted with rage. "This is parental alienation. Her mother has been poisoning her against me for months. The custody evaluator documented it in the report. That's why I have full custody now." I had no idea what was true or false, but I knew this child was genuinely terrified, and I trusted that fear more than any paperwork. We were escorted to a private security office, the man on one side of the room and me with the girl on the other. Grant and Davis reviewed the custody documents while the man made phone calls to his lawyer. I sat with the child in my lap and whispered, "Can you tell me your real name?" She said, "Lily. Lily Foster. Are you really going to keep me safe?" I said yes, even though I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. I asked gently who the man was, and Lily said he was Daniel Grayson. She said her real mommy was named Rebecca, and that Daniel had taken her from Rebecca's apartment 3 days ago with police officers, and said she couldn't see her mommy anymore. She said her mommy had been crying and trying to stop them, but the police said Rebecca had lost custody and had to let Lily go. The story Lily was telling didn't match with Daniel's claims that this was a routine custody exchange being disrupted by an uncooperative ex-wife. 3 days was too long for a transition period, and police involvement suggested something official, but possibly coercive. I asked Lily if Daniel had hurt her, and she shook her head but said he yelled a lot and that his house was cold and she didn't have her stuffed animals or her clothes, and he wouldn't let her call her mommy. Grant finished reviewing the paperwork and came over to me. She said the custody order appeared legitimate, filed in county court 3 weeks ago, giving Daniel Grayson full physical and legal custody of Lily Marie Foster. She said according to the documents, Rebecca Foster had been found unfit due to drug use, neglect, and parental alienation. I said those allegations sounded suspicious, that courts didn't typically remove children from mothers without significant evidence, that something about this felt orchestrated. Grant said she understood my concern but that she couldn't ignore a court order without evidence it was fraudulent. She asked again for my identification to verify I was Rebecca Foster. I had a choice in that moment. I could come clean, admit I was a stranger who'd lied, and watch this terrified child be handed over to a man who made her scream. Or I could commit to the lie, claim I was Rebecca Foster, and buy time to figure out what was really happening. I made my choice and said my identification was in my checked luggage on a flight that had already departed because I'd been rushing to catch Daniel before he took Lily out of state. I said I'd been staying with my sister and all my belongings, including my wallet, were in my suitcase. Daniel immediately said that was convenient and obviously a lie, that I should be arrested for impersonating his ex-wife. Grant asked what my full name was, and I said Rebecca Lynn Foster, hoping that was correct based on the documents. She asked my date of birth, and I hesitated too long. Daniel laughed harshly and said, "She doesn't even know Rebecca's birthday, because she's not Rebecca. I don't know who this woman is, but she just admitted to lying about being my daughter's mother. Arrest her and give me my child." Grant looked at me with disappointment and said, "Ma'am, did you lie about being this child's mother?" Lily started crying again, clutching my shirt and saying, "No, she's helping me. Don't let him take me." I took a breath and said, "I lied about being her biological mother, yes, but I didn't lie about her being in danger. This child was being dragged through the airport screaming, and every instinct I have says something is wrong with this situation. I understand I broke laws by impersonating someone, but I'm asking you to please verify that this custody situation is legitimate before you hand a terrified child over to someone she's clearly afraid of." Daniel was already calling someone, probably his lawyer, saying airport security was refusing to honor a court order. Grant looked torn between following procedure and trusting her own instincts about Lily's fear. Davis suggested they contact the local police and Child Protective Services to investigate further before making any decisions. Daniel exploded at that suggestion, saying he had a flight to catch, that he had business obligations, that this was harassment and discrimination, and he would sue everyone involved. His reaction was too aggressive, too defensive for someone who supposedly had legitimate custody and nothing to hide. Grant made the call to bring in CPS despite Daniel's threats, and I held Lily while we waited, knowing I'd just complicated my life in ways I couldn't begin to predict. 2 hours later, a CPS caseworker named Jennifer Hughes arrived with a police detective named Ray Carmichael. They interviewed Lily separately, then Daniel, then me. When it was my turn, I admitted immediately that I wasn't Rebecca Foster, that I was a stranger named Claire Donovan who'd been traveling for work and had intervened because something felt wrong. I gave them my real identification and explained what I'd witnessed at the gate. Detective Carmichael was skeptical, asking why I'd lied if I had nothing to hide. I said I'd lied because a child was screaming for help and I couldn't stand by and do nothing, that sometimes the law moves too slowly to protect people who need immediate help. I asked if they'd located Rebecca Foster, the actual mother, and Carmichael said they were trying but she wasn't answering her phone or at her listed address. Daniel had provided an address for Rebecca in the custody documents, but when police went there, neighbors said Rebecca had moved out suddenly 2 weeks ago, and no one knew where she'd gone. That information made my stomach drop because it suggested Rebecca was either hiding or had been disappeared somehow. Jennifer Hughes, the CPS worker, said the custody order appeared legitimate on its surface, but she was troubled by Lily's obvious distress and by the circumstances of the case. She said she was placing Lily in emergency foster care until they could locate Rebecca and verify the situation. Daniel threatened legal action immediately, saying CPS had no authority to override a court order, that this was kidnapping by the state. Carmichael said CPS had authority to place children in protective custody when there were concerns about immediate safety, and that Lily's extreme distress warranted investigation. Daniel's lawyer arrived then, a sharp woman in her 40s named Victoria Lang, who immediately demanded Lily be returned to her client. She said the custody order was legally binding, that Daniel had done everything properly through the courts, and that CPS was interfering with a legitimate custody arrangement based on the hysterical claims of a stranger who'd already admitted to lying. Lang said I should be arrested for attempted kidnapping and for filing a false police report. Carmichael said I wasn't being arrested yet, but that I would need to stay available for further questioning. Jennifer Hughes said Lily was being placed with an emergency foster family for 72 hours while they investigated, and that Daniel could file an emergency motion with the court if he wanted to contest the placement. Daniel looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You have no idea what you've done. That child is mine legally, and you just destroyed your own life for nothing. I hope it was worth it." Something about the way he said mine legally instead of my daughter sent chills down my spine. He spoke about Lily as property, not as a child he loved. Lily was taken to a foster home that evening, and I gave my statement to police before being released with instructions not to leave the city. I'd missed my flight and had to explain to my boss why I wasn't at the Chicago conference I was supposed to attend. I told him I'd intervened in a custody situation at the airport and was now involved in an investigation. He was understanding but said I needed to be back for client meetings by Friday. I said I'd do my best but couldn't promise anything. I spent that night in a hotel near the airport, unable to stop thinking about Lily's face when she'd been taken to the foster home. She'd cried and begged me not to leave her, and the foster mother, a kind woman named Phyllis, had to physically hold her while I walked away. Jennifer Hughes had promised to update me on the investigation, though she'd warned that my involvement was complicated since I'd lied about being Rebecca. She said I could face charges for impersonating a parent, for interfering with custody, and potentially for making false statements to law enforcement. I said I understood and accepted whatever consequences came from my actions, but that I needed to know Lily was safe. The next morning, Jennifer called and asked if I could come to the CPS office for a meeting. She said they'd located Rebecca Foster, and the situation was more complicated than anyone had realized. I took a cab to the office and found Jennifer waiting with Detective Carmichael and a woman who looked exhausted and terrified. The woman was Rebecca Foster, and she looked nothing like someone who'd voluntarily given up custody of her daughter. She was thin to the point of being gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that shook when she tried to hold her coffee cup. She was 28 according to the case file, but looked older, worn down by circumstances I didn't yet understand. Jennifer introduced us and explained that I was the person who'd prevented Daniel Grayson from taking Lily out of state. Rebecca started crying immediately and said, "Thank you. Thank you for stopping him. I've been trying to get help for 3 weeks, but no one would listen. They all said the court order was legal and there was nothing anyone could do." Carmichael asked Rebecca to explain from the beginning what had happened, and she told a story that made my blood run cold. She said 6 months ago, a woman named Patricia Donovan had approached her at the grocery store where Rebecca worked as a cashier. Patricia had said she was a lawyer who helped single mothers navigate custody issues, and that she'd noticed Rebecca seemed stressed. Rebecca, who was struggling financially and had just been denied food assistance, had opened up about her situation. She was a single mother working 2 jobs, barely keeping a roof over their heads, falling behind on rent. Patricia had been sympathetic and offered free legal advice. Rebecca said over the next months, Patricia had slowly convinced her that she was an unfit mother, that Lily would be better off in a more stable home, that the stress was clearly affecting Rebecca's ability to parent effectively. Patricia had suggested Rebecca consider a voluntary custody arrangement with a family who could provide better for Lily, just temporarily until Rebecca got back on her feet financially. Rebecca, desperate and believing Patricia genuinely wanted to help, had signed papers she thought were for temporary guardianship. Patricia had assured her it was reversible, that she'd get Lily back once she had stable housing and income. 2 weeks after signing, CPS had shown up at Rebecca's apartment with police and removed Lily based on an emergency custody order. Rebecca had been blindsided because the papers she'd signed weren't for temporary guardianship, but for voluntary termination of parental rights. She'd been tricked into signing away her daughter. The emergency custody order claimed Rebecca had a drug problem, which was false. Claimed she'd been investigated for neglect, which had never happened. Claimed multiple reports of concerning behavior, all fabricated. Rebecca had tried to fight it, but she couldn't afford a lawyer, and the public defender assigned to her case had done almost nothing. The judge had ruled in Daniel Grayson's favor within 3 weeks, giving him full custody based on fraudulent evidence. I felt rage building as Rebecca described being systematically stripped of her rights through a legal process designed to look legitimate. Jennifer Hughes said she'd reviewed the case file and found multiple irregularities. The custody evaluator who'd written the report recommending Daniel receive custody had never actually met Rebecca or visited her home. The drug test that allegedly came back positive didn't match Rebecca's actual test results, which had been clean. The allegations of neglect came from anonymous sources who were never verified. The whole case had been fabricated, but it had been done skillfully enough that it had passed through the court system without raising red flags. Carmichael said they were investigating Patricia Donovan and had discovered she wasn't actually a lawyer. She worked for an organization called Family Futures Consulting that claimed to help place children in stable homes, but which appeared to be a front for trafficking children from poor parents to wealthy buyers through fraudulent legal processes. Daniel Grayson had paid Family Futures $60,000 to acquire Lily through this scheme. He wasn't adopting through legitimate channels because those had long waiting lists and extensive background checks. He'd bought a child through a corrupt system that exploited vulnerable mothers by manipulating them into giving up their rights. Rebecca said she'd been trying to find Lily for 3 weeks since the custody transfer, but Daniel had refused to tell her where he was taking her. She'd been calling police, calling CPS, calling anyone who would listen, But everyone said the court order was final and she had no rights. She'd been sleeping in her car after losing her apartment because she'd spent all her money on trying to get legal help. She said if I hadn't stopped Daniel at the airport, she never would have found Lily again. Daniel had been taking her out of state to his home in California, where Rebecca would have no way to track her down. I asked Jennifer what happened now, what the process was for getting Lily back to her actual mother. Jennifer said it was complicated because the custody order was technically legal, even though it was obtained through fraud. They needed to prove the fraud, which required investigating family features and building a case against everyone involved. That would take time, potentially months. Meanwhile, Lily was in foster care and Rebecca had no custody rights. I asked if Rebecca could at least visit Lily, and Jennifer said not without court approval since legally she had no parental rights. Rebecca broke down completely at that statement, sobbing that she just wanted to see her daughter, to tell her she hadn't abandoned her, that she was fighting to get her back. Carmichael said they were moving as fast as they could, but the legal system didn't have a mechanism for quickly reversing fraudulent custody orders. They needed to petition the court to vacate the original order, prove it was obtained through fraud, investigate everyone involved, and then petition for custody to be returned to Rebecca. The process could take 6 to 8 months even with clear evidence of fraud. Rebecca said she couldn't wait that long, that Lily was only 6 years old and would think she'd been abandoned by her mother. I asked what would happen to Lily during those months, and Jennifer said she'd remain in foster care unless the court granted temporary custody to someone else. I said without thinking, what if I petition for temporary custody? Would the court consider that? Everyone in the room looked at me in surprise. Jennifer said, "You're a stranger who has no relationship with this child. Why would you do that?" I said because Lily knew me now, had bonded with me during those hours at the airport, and I couldn't stand the thought of her sitting in foster care believing no one cared about her. Because I'd made her a promise that I'd keep her safe and I needed to follow through on that. Rebecca looked at me with something between gratitude and confusion. She said, "I don't understand. You don't know me or my daughter. Why would you disrupt your whole life for us?" And I didn't have a good answer except that walking away felt impossible. I'd intervened at the airport on instinct, and that intervention had revealed systematic corruption and exploitation. How could I just return to my normal life knowing what I knew now? I was 34 years old, unmarried, working in corporate finance with a stable income and a boring, predictable life. I had a condo I barely lived in because I traveled constantly for work. I had no children, no serious relationship, nothing tying me to my current existence that felt more important than making sure Lily was okay. I told Rebecca I wasn't trying to replace her or take her daughter, but that maybe I could be a bridge, someone who could provide stability for Lily while Rebecca fought to restore her custody. Jennifer said temporary custody arrangements required background checks, home studies, court approval. It wasn't simple or fast, but she said if I was serious, she could start the process. Carmichael warned that I'd be inserting myself into a criminal investigation, that Daniel Grayson and his associates would likely target me once they realized I was trying to maintain custody. I said I understood the risks. Rebecca asked if she could at least be involved in Lily's life if I got temporary custody, if she could visit and maintain their relationship. I said absolutely, that my whole goal was to keep Lily connected to her real mother while the legal system sorted out the fraud. The process took 3 weeks. I had to pass background checks, provide financial records, submit to a home study, and appear before a judge to explain why I was seeking temporary custody of a child I'd met once. Rebecca testified in support of my petition, saying she trusted me to care for Lily until she could regain custody herself. Jennifer Hughes provided a report saying Lily had bonded with me during the airport incident and had been asking about me repeatedly in foster care. The judge, an older woman named Barbara Chen who seemed suspicious of the whole situation, asked me directly why I was doing this. I said because I'd made a promise to a terrified child and I intended to keep it, and because the system had failed Lily and Rebecca badly enough that someone needed to step in and provide stability while justice was pursued. Judge Chen asked what I knew about raising children. I admitted I knew almost nothing, that I'd never planned to be a parent, but that I was willing to learn and had resources to provide proper care. She asked what happened when the investigation concluded and custody was returned to Rebecca. I said I'd be grateful to have been part of Lily's life during a difficult time and would step back gracefully. Judge Chen looked skeptical but granted temporary custody for 6 months with the stipulation that Rebecca be allowed regular supervised visits and that I attend parenting classes and submit to monthly check-ins with CPS. I picked Lily up from foster care on a Thursday afternoon. She ran to me when she saw me and wrapped her arms around my waist, saying, "You came back. Phyllis said you might not come back, but you did." I knelt down to her level and said, "I told you I'd keep you safe. I keep my promises." Lily asked if she was going to live with me now, and I said yes, for a while, until everything got sorted out with her real mommy. Lily's face fell and she said, "Where's my mommy? Why can't I live with her?" I explained as gently as I could that some bad people had done something wrong and her mommy was fixing it, but it would take time. I said her mommy loved her very much and would be visiting her all the time. Lily asked if I was going to keep her forever, or if she was just staying with me temporarily. The question hurt because I could hear the fear in her voice, the learned expectation that adults would disappoint her and leave her. I said, "You're staying with me as long as you need to. And we're going to make sure you're safe and happy. Your mommy is working very hard to make things right. We drove to my condo and Lily was quiet the whole way, processing this new upheaval in her young life. When we arrived, I showed her the bedroom I'd set up, filled with toys and books I'd bought based on guesses about what 6-year-old girls liked. The first weeks were harder than I'd anticipated. Lily had nightmares constantly, waking up screaming for her mother or crying about the man who'd taken her. She was terrified of being alone, following me from room to room and panicking if I was out of her sight for more than a few minutes. She asked every day when her mommy was coming, and I had to explain repeatedly that her mommy would visit soon but couldn't take her home yet. Rebecca came for her first supervised visit 5 days after Lily moved in with me. Jennifer Hughes was there to supervise since legally Rebecca had no custody rights, and these visits had to be monitored. Lily threw herself into Rebecca's arms sobbing, and Rebecca held her daughter while crying herself. They sat together on my couch and Rebecca tried to explain what had happened in age-appropriate terms. She said some bad people had lied to judges and made it look like she couldn't take care of Lily properly, but that she was proving they were wrong. Lily asked why she couldn't just come home right now if the bad people had lied. Rebecca said because fixing lies takes time when they're told to important people like judges, but that she was fighting every single day to make it right. Lily asked if I was one of the bad people, and Rebecca said absolutely not, that I was a hero who'd saved her from the scary man at the airport. Rebecca visited 3 times a week after that, each visit supervised by either Jennifer or a court-appointed monitor. I stayed in the background during visits, giving them space to maintain their bond while also being available if Lily needed me. It was emotionally complicated watching Rebecca parent her own child in my living room while I played host. I felt guilty for having what Rebecca should have had, guilty for the ways Lily was bonding with me while her real mother watched from a supervised distance. But Rebecca never showed resentment. She thanked me constantly for caring for Lily, for keeping her safe, for not trying to replace her as Lily's mother. She asked my advice about Lily's fears and nightmares and seemed genuinely grateful that Lily had someone stable during this crisis. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into Family Futures Consulting was moving forward slowly. Carmichael discovered that Patricia Donovan had targeted at least 12 other single mothers in similar schemes over the past 3 years. Most had been poor women with limited education and no resources to fight back. Some had signed voluntary termination papers believing they were temporary guardianship agreements. Others had been threatened with CPS investigations if they didn't comply. All had lost custody of their children to wealthy buyers who'd paid between $50,000 and $90,000 per child. Daniel Grayson was arrested 6 weeks after the airport incident and charged with child trafficking, conspiracy to commit fraud, and bribery of public officials. Turned out the judge who'd approved Lily's custody transfer had received a $25,000 payment from an offshore account linked to Family Futures. The custody evaluator who'd never met Rebecca had been paid $15,000 to fabricate her report. The lab that had produced false drug test results was being investigated for similar fraud in dozens of other cases. The whole system had been corrupted by an organization that realized vulnerable children could be bought and sold through legal processes if you had enough money to bribe the right people. Victoria Lang, Daniel's lawyer, was also under investigation for knowing her client was acquiring children illegally and facilitating the transactions. Carmichael said building the case against everyone involved would take months because they needed to identify all the victims, gather evidence of every transaction, and prove the conspiracy went beyond isolated incidents. But he was confident they'd secure convictions. Daniel Grayson was being held on $1 million bail, which his lawyer claimed was excessive for someone with no prior criminal record. The judge pointed out that Daniel had attempted to flee the state with a child obtained through fraud and represented a flight risk. He remained in custody pending trial. Rebecca's case for having her custody restored was tangled in legal complexity. Her original court-appointed attorney had failed to challenge the fraudulent evidence, which meant she needed to file a motion to vacate the custody order based on newly discovered evidence of fraud. She needed to prove Patricia Donovan had deliberately deceived her into signing termination papers. She needed to demonstrate that she was a fit parent despite months of living in poverty and homelessness. The process required lawyers she couldn't afford, and the public defender system was overwhelmed. I ended up hiring an attorney for Rebecca, a family law specialist named David Ortega, who'd handled similar cases of custody fraud. Ortega was expensive, and I was spending money faster than I'd planned, but I couldn't watch Rebecca drown in a legal system stacked against her. Ortega filed an emergency motion to restore Rebecca's custody based on clear evidence of fraud. The prosecutor's office submitted evidence from their criminal investigation supporting Rebecca's claims. We all expected quick resolution because the fraud was so obvious. But the system doesn't move quickly even when the facts are clear. The judge handling Rebecca's case said he needed time to review all the evidence, to hear from all parties involved, to ensure that restoring custody was in Lily's best interest. That phrase, Lily's best interest, became weaponized against Rebecca because her current circumstances were still precarious. Ortega explained that judges consider stability when making custody decisions. Rebecca was currently unemployed, living in a friend's spare room, and had spent months in crisis. I had stable housing, stable income, and Lily was adapting to life with me. The judge could decide that moving Lily again would be traumatic, and that she should remain with me until Rebecca demonstrated sustained stability. It was the cruelest kind of catch-22, because Rebecca couldn't get stable until she got her daughter back, but couldn't get her daughter back until she was stable. I testified at Rebecca's custody hearing, explaining how she'd been systematically targeted and exploited. I described her dedication to Lily during supervised visits, her commitment to rebuilding her life, her clear love for her daughter. I said I was providing temporary care only, and that Lily belonged with her mother. The prosecutor testified about the trafficking scheme and Rebecca's victimization. Jennifer Hughes testified that Rebecca had never actually been an unfit parent, that all allegations against her had been fabricated. But Daniel Grayson's lawyer was still involved because legally he still had custody until the order was vacated. Victoria Lang argued that regardless of how Daniel obtained custody, the fact remained that Rebecca had signed voluntary termination papers and had been found unfit by a court. She argued that my intervention had created instability for Lily and that the child's current placement with me might actually be the best option long-term. The suggestion that I should keep Lily permanently was absurd and offensive. I testified angrily that I had never sought to replace Rebecca, that Lily had a loving mother who'd been victimized by criminals, and that suggesting I keep her child was rewarding the traffickers who'd stolen her in the first place. Judge Andrew Foster, who was handling Rebecca's case, said he understood my position, but that he had to consider all options for Lily's welfare. He said he was continuing my temporary custody for another 6 months, while Rebecca worked with social services to establish stable housing and employment. He said he was vacating the original custody order to Daniel Grayson based on clear evidence of fraud. But he was not immediately restoring custody to Rebecca. She'd have to prove herself stable first. Rebecca looked broken when the ruling came down. She'd been fighting for 4 months to get her daughter back, and the judge had essentially told her she wasn't good enough yet. I found her outside the courthouse afterwards, sitting on a bench crying. I sat next to her and said, "We're not giving up. We'll get you stable and get Lily home, however long it takes." Rebecca said, "What if it takes too long? What if Lily forgets about me? What if she starts thinking of you as her mother instead?" I said that would never happen, that Lily talked about her mommy constantly, that our visits kept their bond strong. But privately, I was worried about the same thing. Lily had been with me for 4 months and was settling into a routine. She'd started first grade at the local elementary school, made friends, joined an after-school art program. She still had nightmares and still asked about going home to her mommy, but they were becoming less frequent. She called me Claire but sometimes slipped and called me mommy before correcting herself. She drew pictures of our family that included her real mommy, but also me. She was adapting to her circumstances, and I didn't know if that adaptation would make it harder for her to transition back to Rebecca eventually. I was also becoming attached in ways I hadn't anticipated. Lily's bedtime routine, her questions about how things worked, her artwork covering my refrigerator, all of it had become part of my daily life. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job to focus on parenting, which my boss had been surprisingly supportive about. He said he'd hold my position for 6 months, but after that I'd need to either return or resign. I was running out of time professionally while Rebecca ran out of time legally. Meanwhile, the trial against Daniel Grayson and the Family Futures conspirators was scheduled for 8 months away. Carmichael said they'd identified 32 children who'd been trafficked through the scheme over 4 years. Some biological parents had been located and were fighting to restore custody. Others had died or couldn't be found. Some children were too young to remember their biological families and had bonded with the buyers who'd purchased them. The whole situation was a nightmare of legal complexity where even clear cases of trafficking didn't have easy solutions. How do you restore a 3-year-old to biological parents they don't remember when they've been with their buyer parents for 2 years? How do you separate children from people they've bonded with even if those people acquired them criminally? How do you balance justice for the biological parents with stability for the children? Judge Foster's caution about Lily's placement suddenly made more sense. He was trying to balance Rebecca's rights as a biological mother against Lily's need for stability. But that calculus was wrong because it punished Rebecca for circumstances created by criminals and rewarded the system that had enabled the trafficking. I started attending advocacy meetings for other biological parents who'd been victimized by Family Futures. Most were women, most were poor, all had been systematically stripped of their children through legal manipulation. Some had been told their children were being adopted by loving families and had believed they were making noble sacrifices. Others had been threatened with criminal charges if they didn't comply. One mother, Keisha Thompson, shared that she'd been told if she didn't sign termination papers voluntarily, CPS would investigate her for abuse and she'd go to jail. She'd signed believing she was protecting herself from false prosecution, not realizing the abuse allegations would be filed anyway as justification for the removal. Another mother, Diana Liu, had been approached by Patricia Donovan after a domestic violence incident and told her children would be safer with a family who could protect them from her abusive ex-husband. Diana had agreed to temporary placement, believing her children would be in foster care while she got a restraining order and found safe housing. Instead, they'd been sold to a couple in Arizona who'd paid $80,000. Diana had been fighting for 2 years to get them back. These stories repeated with variations, a pattern of exploitation targeting women in crisis, women who trusted a system that was supposed to protect them, but was instead preying on their vulnerability. I realized Rebecca and Lily were actually among the lucky ones because I'd intervened early enough to prevent permanent separation. Many of the other families might never be reunited. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Carmichael's investigation revealed that Family Futures had connections to family court judges in 3 states, custody evaluators in 4 counties, CPS workers who received kickbacks for looking the other way, and lawyers who facilitated fraudulent adoptions. The organization had generated millions of dollars by selling children to wealthy buyers who couldn't or wouldn't go through legitimate adoption channels. Some buyers had been rejected by adoption agencies due to criminal records or failed background checks. Others simply didn't want to wait years on adoption waiting lists. Family Futures offered a faster alternative that looked legal because it went through the court system, even though every step was fraudulent. Patricia Donovan was arrested 7 months after the airport incident. She'd been in hiding, living under a false name in Nevada, but had been tracked down through financial records. She was charged with child trafficking, racketeering, bribery, fraud, and conspiracy. She faced up to 40 years in federal prison if convicted on all counts. During her interrogation, she showed no remorse, arguing she'd been helping children escape poverty by placing them with families who could provide better lives. She genuinely believed she'd been doing good work, that poor mothers shouldn't be allowed to keep their children when wealthier parents could offer more opportunities. Her complete lack of understanding about why what she'd done was wrong was chilling. She'd convinced herself that the ends justified the means, that she was saving children rather than stealing them. Her arrest made national news and triggered investigations in other states where similar schemes might be operating. Rebecca finally secured stable employment 8 months after losing Lily, working as an office assistant for a nonprofit that helped trafficking victims. The job came with benefits and steady hours, and she rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. She submitted updated petitions to the court showing her stability and requesting restoration of custody. Judge Foster scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks later. The night before the hearing, I sat with Lily and tried to explain what might happen. I said her mommy had been working very hard to make a good home for her, and that the judge might decide it was time for Lily to go back to living with her mommy. Lily was quiet for a long time before asking, "Would I still see you?" I said yes, that we'd always be part of each other's lives, that I'd visit as often as Rebecca allowed. Lily started crying and said, "I don't want to choose. I love mommy, but I love you too. Why can't we all live together?" The question broke my heart because it was so innocent and impossible. I said sometimes life didn't work out the way we wanted, but that didn't mean we lost the people we loved. I said her mommy was her real family and she belonged with her mommy, but that I would always care about her and be there if she needed me. The custody hearing was emotional and complicated. Rebecca testified about her employment, her apartment, her readiness to resume parenting. She'd completed parenting classes and trauma counseling. She'd maintained consistent visits with Lily for 9 months. She'd done everything required of her despite having been victimized by criminals. I testified that Lily should be returned to her mother, that my role had always been temporary, that Rebecca had demonstrated commitment and stability. Lily was brought in for a brief interview with the judge, who asked in chambers what she wanted. Lily apparently said she wanted to live with her mommy but didn't want to stop seeing me. Judge Foster took a week to decide. During that week, I prepared Lily's things for transition, packing her clothes and toys and artwork. Part of me was relieved that Lily would be restored to her rightful parent, that justice would finally be served. Another part of me was devastated because I'd fallen in love with this child I'd never planned to parent. Lily had changed my entire life, had given me purpose and meaning I'd been lacking. Letting her go was necessary and right, but excruciatingly painful. When Judge Foster's ruling came down, he granted primary custody to Rebecca with provisions for a gradual transition and ongoing involvement from me as a family friend. I'd have visitation rights if Rebecca agreed, which she did immediately. The transition took 3 weeks. Lily spent increasing amounts of time at Rebecca's apartment until finally she moved there permanently. The first night Lily wasn't in my condo felt hollow and wrong. I walked past her empty bedroom and felt grief as profound as any I'd experienced. Rebecca called that night and put Lily on the phone. Lily said, "Claire, I miss you. Can you come over tomorrow?" I said yes. I'd come for dinner. That became our routine. I had dinner with Rebecca and Lily twice a week. We celebrated Lily's 7th birthday together. I attended her school events. I was part of her life, but not her primary parent, which was how it should be. The criminal trials began 9 months after the airport incident. Daniel Grayson was convicted of child trafficking, attempted kidnapping, and bribery. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Patricia Donovan was convicted on 17 counts, including racketeering and trafficking. She received 30 years. The judge who'd accepted bribes was disbarred and sentenced to 10 years. The custody evaluator received 5 years. Victoria Lang lost her law license for knowingly facilitating illegal adoptions. The entire conspiracy was dismantled and dozens of children were identified as victims. Some were reunited with biological parents. Others remained with the buyers because the legal situation was too complex to resolve cleanly. Lily started therapy to process her trauma. She had nightmares less frequently, but still struggled with trust and attachment. Her therapist said children who experienced what Lily experienced often dealt with lifelong anxiety about abandonment and safety. But she was resilient and loved, and that made all the difference. Rebecca and I became genuine friends, bonded by our shared love for Lily and by the crisis we'd navigated together. She thanked me constantly for stepping in when no one else would, for keeping Lily safe during the months she couldn't. I thanked her for trusting me with her daughter and for never resenting my involvement. 2 years after the airport incident, Rebecca mentioned she was considering letting me formally adopt Lily as a second parent if I was interested. Not to replace Rebecca, but to give Lily legal connection to both of us. She said Lily considered me family and it would give me legal rights if something ever happened to Rebecca. I was surprised by the offer and said I needed time to think about it. A month later, I said yes. The adoption process was straightforward because Rebecca consented, and the court recognized my existing relationship with Lily. At 8 years old, Lily was adopted by both her biological mother and by the stranger who'd pretended to be her mother to save her at an airport. The judge who finalized the adoption, ironically Judge Foster, who'd handled the custody case, said it was one of the most unusual and heartwarming cases he'd ever overseen. Lily is 12 now, splitting time between Rebecca's apartment and my condo, calling both of us mom in different ways, carrying the trauma of her early childhood, but also the security of knowing she's fiercely loved and protected. Rebecca remarried last year to a kind man who treats Lily as his daughter. I'm dating someone who understands my complicated family situation and loves me anyway. The three of us, sometimes four when Rebecca's husband joins, celebrate holidays together, navigate co-parenting challenges, and build a family structure that doesn't fit conventional definitions, but works for us. Daniel Grayson was denied parole last month and won't be eligible again for 5 years. Patricia Donovan will die in prison. The Family Futures organization was completely shut down, and its assets were seized to provide restitution for victims. The judge who'd taken bribes lost everything and serves his sentence in the same facility as some of the people he'd falsely ruled against. Justice took years and was incomplete, but it came. Some nights I still think about that moment in the airport when I made the split-second decision to pretend to be a stranger's mother. I think about how easily I could have walked away, minded my own business, caught my flight to Chicago. I think about how Lily's entire life would be different if I'd made that choice. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do, and sometimes lies told for the right reasons become truth in ways you never expected. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.